Hi, everyone. It's Nancy Leffler,
And Dan Leffler with Being with Grief.
and we are back for this month's installment of our webinar, Changing the Conversation Around Grief. As always, if you're here in person, we invite you to put any questions that you have in the chat, or you can also wait until the end. We will have an opportunity for you to leave the questions or to answer questions live.
Yes, and today our topic is about presence, what it means and how it can be a way of dealing with your grief. And, today I think it's an important topic.
Yes, and we decided to choose this topic for this time of the year because while presence is always important, this time of year can be stressful for a lot of us, whether you are grieving or not. The holidays can be stressful in their own right. And so learning how to be present, learning how to recognize what presence is, and learning how to invite presence into our lives, we found is really important.
And it's an important way of taking care of yourself during stressful times. And as Nancy mentioned, holidays, as we exit the Thanksgiving and come into Christmas and New Year's, there can be a lot of anxiety, a lot of stress associated with family gatherings, with did I get the right present?
Right.
Did I end the year on a good note? And
Yeah.
it's a way of bringing that idea of self-care to the forefront.
Right. So today we're going to talk about what presence is. How do we know we're present? What are some of the ways that we get present? And we'll also ask you the same question. Before we do that, let's talk a little bit about why being present is important when we're meeting our grief. Because it's not, you don't often hear about presence as a way to help you on your grief journey.
Yeah, that's true. Especially coming from a man's perspective. For me, I wasn't very aware and present to what the loss of my daughter was going to mean to me as I entered into this unknown territory. And it became important for me to delve into that and get at the heart of who I was and to begin a daily presence practice that we'll talk about more.
Yeah, and for me, being present helps me to recognize the feelings that I'm feeling in this moment. And when we're not present, when I'm not present, I'll speak for myself, I tend to push those feelings away, and I tend to do many things mindlessly, which we'll also talk about a little bit later. So presence is important in our daily lives. It's a great resource for daily living and meeting the common everyday stresses that we experience, and something that's more traumatic or bigger, like grief. And hopefully you'll see the correlation as we continue with our conversation here. So what is presence? What's presence to you, Dan?
I think that for me, it means having awareness of myself in space, and also that my mind is not filled with a bunch of scattered thoughts, that I can focus, I can feel myself and let my emotions or take a check on what my emotions are at the moment.
Yes, so there's many different layers of presence, and I've been practicing presence now for, gosh, close to 30 years, and I continue to learn the nuances of what presence is. So presence is everything that Dan just said. And we can also be present to another person. We can be present to what we're doing. We can be present to ourselves. And so being present means to me to give my entire focus and awareness to whatever it is I'm doing in the moment. And when I talk about present moment awareness, it's being in this moment, this one, and now this one. And I used to get, my head used to get more involved in this, and I used to try to think, well, how do I know if it's this moment or now there's this moment? What does that mean? How can I be in this moment? And so anytime I find myself in my head or listening to the stories that my head is chattering about, I'm not present. So knowing what it's not for me helps me to know when it is. And one of the things that we always do in Samyama, which is the present moment awareness practice that I teach, which we'll also talk a little bit more in detail about in a few moments, is that we always start with what's here now. We are always being with whatever is here now. We're not being with what we thought we were going to talk about or what we want to talk about in the future, which so often we're thinking about, well, what if this happens? And what if that happens? And what if I don't do this? And what I find when I can leave those stories be for a moment and be present to what's here, I receive answers that I didn't know I was going to receive.
The greatest example that I can give now is the presence of a 2-year-old. Our granddaughter is in her second year, 28 months, and she is constantly present. There isn't a moment when she is not aware of herself in space as she's learning to walk and now learning what it is to balance and run and
climb and
dance.
And dance, and presence is her. She's almost never not present. Everything she does is with total focus and awareness of who she is. So she's one of our greatest teachers right now of being present. And she very often when we're doesn't work as easily now, because when she takes her nap, she wants stories. When she was a little bit younger, I could invite her to come into her heart, and she knows what that is. She knows where her heart is. She puts her hand there, and to breathe into her heart. And whenever I did that, she would fall asleep almost immediately. So that brings us to our next question. When do you know that you are present?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think that what we're talking about is, for me, like I said, I know when I'm in my body, and to be embodied as a 2-year-old, you're learning your body. And I came across a great quote by the Mr. Rogers. And he said, a child's work is to play and to be in that body and to learn what it can do and how it can, so for me, that is as you said, a great example.
And feeling like I'm in my body too is important for me. When I first began learning presence, one of the analogies was you cannot go anywhere. If you are driving someplace, you can't go anywhere until you get into the car. So if I'm not in my body, I can't go anywhere either. I can't go where I want to go, which is the present moment. So that's one way that I know that. And also when I am helping someone to learn Samyama, a question I ask often is, notice the difference when you're in your head and when you're in your heart. And eventually you begin to recognize what it feels like. It's a feeling. It's for me, and I know for a lot of people that I've worked with, it's a feeling that sometimes you can't even name. And that's when you know you're present. If you cannot name the feeling.
Interesting. For me, it is that awareness of space. And
Mhm,
one of the greatest ways for me is being out in nature,
mhm.
being um, with Aria in the park and, watching her run through the grass and, touching everything and, being curious, picking up stones, smelling a flower. Um, you know,
Yeah, and feeling grounded for me when I have my feet flat on the floor and breathe through my body and into my feet. That's one way that I also can feel presence. That's one of the ways that I get present, in addition to bringing awareness into my heart. But yeah, being in nature is a great one because nature is such a great teacher for so many things, including presence, because everything in nature is present. It's the fall is over now. However, the trees always release their leaves every single year, and they don't hold on to them and say, "Oh, I'm going to be so sad when you're gone." They know what the rhythm of life is, and they put on a great show of color, and then they release the leaves. And the same thing in when the flowers are blooming in the in the spring. A rose doesn't try to be a daisy because it's next door to it. That they each bloom in their own glory, and they don't try to compete with each other like we do sometimes.
true, true.
So there's so many lessons in nature, and just being in nature and watching the flowers and the vegetables and the bees pollinate. It's just a great way to
Just being aware of the weather.
being aware of the weather.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's old habits, but um, for me, that was the start of my day is,
Mhm.
what will I find myself in? And that's a great expression. What will I find myself in? How do I find myself?
Yeah, I
And
like that.
and for one of the things that um, I used was journaling. I was
Yeah.
never a big journaler, not like Nancy has been, throughout the 30 plus years of her practice. But after Leah died, I began writing, and now I write more frequently.
Well, and I think there's a distinction that I like to make between journaling and writing for my blog or writing my book. I may get seeds of an idea from journaling, but journaling is just for you. My journaling is just for me. I always find that I can think about something, yet when I write about it, it excavates something that I never expected.
True. Yeah.
The words on the and then you receive the germ of an idea for a blog or for something that you want to post on social media or somewhere else, and so
And it evolves.
it evolves. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we both have been mentioning that we haven't been journaling as much as we had been. We had a morning journaling practice of over a year, and then
Babysitting.
for a lot of reasons we've let that go to some extent.
Yeah.
So that's one of the things that I want to begin doing again is journaling, because it really helps me to process things in a way that nothing else does.
Yeah, that's true. Another thing that helps me to be present is exercising. And, not always my favorite thing to do, but
Yeah.
when I am in it and in that moment of testing my body, of, being aware of the muscles and trying to avoid the stress and strain of hurting myself, I am in my body and I am present.
Yeah, and exercise or movement doesn't have to be a real exertion workout. It can be, ask yourself how your body wants to move today. Maybe your body wants to dance like a 2-year-old. Or maybe your body wants to do some stretching or some yoga or whatever it is. Ask yourself how your body wants to move today. Slow stretching movements can be just as grounding and make you aware of presence as any other kind of movement.
Another favorite of mine is napping or resting or retiring at the end of the day.
Yeah.
You know,
Listening to your body and knowing when it's time to go to bed or when it's time to take a nap instead of trying to push through because you have to do one more thing. And that again induces stress. And when you're stressed, you're not present.
true. That's right.
Yeah.
So,
And along with that, it comes slowing down. And slowing down doesn't mean not doing anything. It means just what it says, slowing down, doing everything slower. And what that means to me, and what I found is that when I slow down and when I'm mindful, which comes up in a few moments, I tend to get more done. Because when I slow down and do one thing at a time rather than trying to multitask, sometimes when I used to multitask everything, not everything would get done efficiently, and I would have to do things over, and I would make mistakes. And if I was thinking now more about when I was working in my corporate job, slowing down can really enhance your life and make you aware of your surroundings and make you really appreciate what you have.
true. Yeah.
My favorite way of being present is with samyama, the present moment awareness practice that I teach. And I've shared some of that with you here. And if you want to learn more about it, you can go on my YouTube channel. I have some practices there. Samyama is a heart-centered present moment awareness practice that helps us to be in our hearts and to feel our feelings without attachment to the stories and to be with what is without needing to change it. Now, I just said a whole lot there, and if you're not familiar with samyama, it may not, you may have a lot of questions, or it may have gone right over your head. So I welcome any questions that you have about that. And those are I have, as I said, I have a lot of resources for samyama in a variety of places: my website, my YouTube channel, etc. And there are also other types of meditation. You know, anytime you quiet your mind, walking meditations or walking a labyrinth can be
Sure.
a meditative experience.
Anytime you're in a prayerful
Yes. Yeah.
mood or place, whether it be we mentioned at the end of the day when you're reflecting on your spirit, your beliefs.
Yeah.
It can be
But having a gratitude practice.
exactly. Gratitude is a great way.
Yeah. Yeah.
One of the other things that came up while we were preparing for this was, okay, well, being present is great, and being aware of your environment, but what happens if you're out of your natural environment? And the thing that came to me is when I'm in water, it's not my natural environment. Whether I'm swimming, and if I'm not aware when I'm swimming, I'm sinking. And I think that's another great analogy. If you are not aware of being in an environment that is unfamiliar, and we talk about grief as an unfamiliar territory, if you're not aware, then you may be sinking. And whether that is a comforting image, but I think it's applicable in the idea of grief.
Yeah. I like that analogy because grief isn't your natural environment. And when you find yourself in it, you don't know what to do. So getting present makes sense to as a first line of defense, so to speak, it's to get present.
Well, and we often talk that because grief is an unfamiliar territory, you need some sort of a roadmap, and
Right.
that signpost of your awareness of yourself and where you are. Yeah, you may be in grief, in a terrible position, but being aware of it and knowing that you don't want to be there. You
Right.
want to be someplace else. And how do you get from A to B?
Yeah, and sometimes the first thing is to acknowledge it, to speak it, to write it down, to write about it. So yeah, all those things. So let's talk about mindlessness versus mindfulness. So when you are present, you are mindful. You hear about mindful living all the time. And sometimes when we hear about those things all the time, we don't, it just kind of, again, goes over our head. We don't really understand or take the time to understand what it means, versus doing something mindlessly. I do mindless things all the time, and I know I'm not present at that point. But what happens if you're doing something like driving mindlessly? There's been many times when I found myself driving and I would wonder, where am I? How did I get here? And that was kind of a scary thing. Eating, I used to eat mindlessly all the time. I don't do it quite as much now, although there's probably times when I still do it, but I'm more aware. I become aware of it faster. So when you're eating mindfully, you are aware of what you are eating. You are acknowledging that it is nourishing your body, and I don't eat if I'm not hungry for a certain thing. If I want to eat something but I don't know what I'm hungry for, I ask, what am I really hungry for? Do I really need to go out for a walk, or do I really need to take a bath? What am I hungry for? So it's not always food. The other example I gave yesterday when we were talking about this was cooking. If I cook mindlessly, I might cut myself, or I might burn myself or burn the food. So when I'm cooking mindfully, I'm more engaged in the process, and I'm also infusing the meal with love and presence.
Yeah, and the intention of what you're trying to do. One example that comes to mind of mindless versus mindful was and I know I've told you this story, but for the benefit, while Leo was still with us, we were having difficulty about going to church. And she didn't feel like it was doing anything for her. And it was, a mindless activity where her mind wandered. And I agree. There was times when I wasn't listening to the sermon. And so one Sunday, she and I climbed in the car. We were going to go to church, and I pulled a fast one on her. I took her up to the state park with an overlook to the valley. We were living in Frederick, Maryland at the time, and we just sat in the temple of nature and looked out across the valley at the church, at her school, at all the people that were on the highway. And we just talked about being in something greater than ourselves, and gave her a different appreciation for what it was like to live in the spirit. And that was one of my favorite memories of time together.
Yeah, I just got a bigger sense of what that means to you, how important that memory is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, not to, say, being mindless in church isn't something that happens, I admit it, but
Well, again, it might be a
people-
sign of what, if you're mindless, what do you need? What's missing?
right. And one of the things that might be missing, you might be missing if you are approaching something mindlessly, is the opportunities in life that presents itself to you.
Yeah, you might miss them.
Yeah. And going through a day in mindless distraction of the things that I gotta do, and they're on my list, may not speak to the things that you're missing, an awareness of the
Mhm.
things that are around you, of the
Yeah.
people who you come into contact with that are affected. And there's been so many stories about
Yeah.
paying it forward, or how someone's awareness of you may change their day, may change their life, may change their whole outlook on
Yeah.
things.
And if you're not present, you might miss it. And I think of all the times when I was living in a mindless place almost 100% of the time, because so many things needed to be done. I had so many responsibilities, and that just talking about that, I can feel the stress in my body. And when we live with that chronic stress and with that mindless mindset, we don't have time to slow down. We don't think we have time to slow down, and we may miss connections with family, or even with our coworkers, and with our friends, real deep and meaningful connections. We may interact with them,
Right.
but that connection that you had with Leah that day, that's powerful.
Yeah,
and
it was very profound.
so those are some of the things that may be missed if you're not present. Your time and your schedule may be affected.
Well, and one of the other things, we're talking about personal connections, so many times the talk around the water cooler is very on the surface. It
Mhm.
is, oh, how was your day? I've mentioned this before, those connections that you might have with the person at the deli counter or the checkout person, the connections that we may miss because we are distracted
In our own world.
Yeah.
How many times have someone said something to me in a grocery store or something, and I didn't hear them, or and I've said to them, I'm in my own world today, and they'll say, I understand. And we do understand, because we all are there. And yet maybe I could have had a meaningful conversation with someone if I was paying attention.
That's true. How about and I know I'm guilty of this as well. You are daydreaming, you're sitting in the car, and all of a sudden you realize the light had turned green and you're still sitting there.
Guy behind you is honking.
Well, yeah, that's happened too. And you're in that in caught inside your head, and I call it the hamster wheel, that
Yeah.
spins and spins. And tying that back to our discussions about grief and loss,
Mhm.
if you're on that hamster wheel of I could have done something, the woulda, coulda, shouldas,
Right.
then you are again missing something that can affect your day, your schedule, your the
Yes.
flow of your life. Yeah.
Right. Right. And so not being present adds stress, like we've been talking about. And you've heard us talk often about smaller griefs, and the smaller griefs are the day-to-day stuff that happen. Missing a lunch because we're late, we got stuck in traffic, or whatever
Didn't
it
mail that
is.
letter on time. Christmas
Yeah,
cards.
And so the not being present can add stress. And when we're stressed, we're not present. So it's kind of like a what
Yeah,
are those things called?
Yeah, a conundrum.
A conundrum. Yeah, I was thinking that too. That's not
Yeah, it's not
probably
quite right.
exactly it. So as we were preparing for this week, today's webinar, we realized that there's a lot of missed opportunities, and we have an opportunity to go much, much deeper. And so that will be a topic as we begin 2023. We'll go even deeper into that and see what else comes up in our conversation as we're present to that topic. So that ends our discussion for today. If you are watching this on a replay and you have questions, please put them in the Facebook group or contact us directly. We will be publishing at least the first 6 months of our topics for next year. If there's a topic that you would like us to include, please let us know.
And as always, we're here if there is something that you need to discuss, and we've really only touched on this subject, as you're
Yeah.
saying. You may have your own ideas on how you can be present.
Yes.
We'd like to hear those. And
yes, absolutely.
look
Let's
forward-
make a big long list of how to be present so that it's always accessible.
True. So until next time, thanks again for stopping in, listening, and we look forward to our next time together.
Bye.